Prior to the pandemic, President Trump enjoyed unwavering support from his base, but his numbers there were always strong. His rallies were always well attended, and from the first day he took office, the president's polling and ratings have been some of the utmost importance to him.
Now that the numbers aren't looking as good, he is apparently reacting. According to a recent piece in the New York Times, quote, a campaign that had been projecting strength and invincibility for 2 years was polling behind a candidate the president views as extremely weak. Joining us now via Skype to talk about whether Trump should be worried is journalist Zaid Jilani. Great to see you, Zaid.
Good to be here.
How do you read the current sort of state of the race and what this election is ultimately going to turn on come November?
Look, I think one of President Trump's big assets going into this election had been the economy. I mean, not only had you seen a very long recovery following the Great Recession, but you'd actually seen a lot of tightening of wages even on the lower end, which I think many Americans saw as a positive thing. It was a strong counterbalance to President Trump's kind of personality, his kind of daily feuds on various topics and issues and with people. However, the pandemic has totally altered the calculus. I mean, I think we're expecting to see 19 or 20% unemployment rate right now, and at the same time you see the president still engaging in feuds, still engaging in kind of constant bickering and back and forth with members of the media, with the opposition politicians, so on and so forth. And I think that just isn't projecting the kind of strength that they thought they had going into this election. I think they thought they would have a weak Joe Biden who's kind of absent off the scene. They could show they had a strong economy, the set of achievements. But when you're looking at that kind of unemployment rate and you see President Trump continue to kind of lash out in the way his personality is, it's hard to see such an easy electoral path, which we could have easily seen, I think, a year ago.
Yeah, I agree with you, Zaid, which is the electoral path is certainly not easy. One of the dynamics that we've covered here that's very significant is that while Biden does not necessarily have the African-American support that he would need, the younger voter support, Hispanic support, that he's gaining with seniors, largely because they're afraid of coronavirus and growing calls to reopen the economy. What do you make of that entire dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a weird spot for Trump in that I think people within his party are split at the elite level. I think some of them, let's say Governor DeWine in Ohio, I think were very strong in terms of closing early, addressing the public health crisis very early. I think Trump himself has kind of been of two minds on this. Some days it seems like he's pushing people away from reopening too fast. Other days he seems to be pushing them to open quicker. He's kind of trying to play both sides. But public opinion right now is still squarely much more in the direction of having a slower opening and kind of a slower kind of reintroduction of of sectors of the economy, while at the same time, by the way, people continue to need the economic help. But Trump's allies in Congress, many of them, seem to be blocking that. Mitch McConnell saying he doesn't want to do major spending. He doesn't want to keep Americans employed. I think people in the White House are telling Trump you should do a payroll tax cut now, which honestly will not help the 20% of Americans who don't have a payroll right now.
Right.
So I think that the reality is that Trump came into this office, I think, not really asserting himself in many ways. He's much more interested in kind of the bantering with CNN, the Twitter feeds, the rallies. His inability to focus on policy, stick to a position and drive it through, maybe what ends up doing him in. Because right now what you really need is strong, kind of compassionate leadership, firm leadership, and you need an economic solution, because the economic crisis that's happening right now may end up impacting way more Americans and lasting longer than the public health crisis, and yet the White House is just absent on that. They don't have any creative solutions beyond the first few batches. It seems like they've left the playing field altogether.
I mean, payroll tax cut is hilariously a bad idea, right? As you said, we have 30 million Americans who filed for unemployment. They are not on a payroll. And the Democrats really left this lane wide open because it's not like their response has been amazing. And yet the Trump administration has not been able to grab that mantle. I mean, back in 2016, Hillary Clinton's campaign decided to make the election a referendum on the person of Donald Trump. That obviously didn't work out. This time around, it's essentially, whether the Biden campaign wants it to be that or not, we are headed for a similar dynamic of basically an up or down vote on Donald Trump and specifically his response to coronavirus. This time around, though, because of the crisis, because the landscape is so different, that referendum strategy could actually work for Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly could. And a lot of it depends on whether the Republican Party got serious in its response to this, whether it could have a united position and whether it could address the kind of dual prongs of a public health crisis and an economic crisis. Right now, they're torn in so many different directions that even if Joe Biden just stayed in the background and played as generic Democrat, he might be able to win just as an alternative to what seems like a chaotic and kind of directionless and rudderless Republican Party. And a lot of this falls squarely on Donald Trump. I mean, can he actually be a consistent, principled leader who actually carries through a response from point A to point B without getting, distracted, misdirected, changing his mind about things as he seems to be about lockdown every other day. So much of this falls onto him right now, and it really is a matter of whether he can have the discipline and he can have the vision, because right now his party is just not seen as being able to rise to the occasion of the scope of the disaster. And even a weak opposition party, just by merit of not being the people in charge right now, could win in that scenario.
I think you're 100% right, Zaid. And that's one thing that you and I have talked quite a bit about, which is about the nascent kind of populists on the right are not necessarily in power right now, and to the point where they're almost not being listened to at all. Why do you think that dynamic has occurred, despite the fact that this could not be a more populist moment, and yet the establishments of both parties seem totally committed to their old ideologies and corporatism?
Look, I think there's an old phrase, they started using it around the Reagan era, is that personnel is policy. I think President Trump didn't really expect to win the presidency. I think he had like a vacation planned or something. Some people suspected maybe he wanted to start a TV network after the election. He wasn't really trying really hard, but he did end up winning. But when he ended up winning, who were the people that were sitting around with the ideas? They were basically old Bush staff, old Reagan staff. It was very difficult to find people with heterodox ideas, and really there's only a few of those in the Trump administration, and they generally had limited influence. People like Steve Bannon ended up getting fired. People like Peter Navarro was basically ignored when he was trying to warn the White House about the virus. And I think, that dynamic is so much of what drove the Obama White House as well, in terms of them grabbing tons of old Clinton people, Larry Summers, Timothy Geithner, driving so much of their response to the crises where they failed. With the Great Recession was a huge failure for the Obama administration in terms of home rescues and economic revival. And I think this it just shows how important it is to get people around the president or around our senior politicians who can actually introduce new ideas and drive them to actualization. I think so much of what happens in government is just inertia from the people who are already there. And the reality is, having Art Laffer around you, having Steve Mnuchin around you, these people don't have any novel ideas. They're proposing the exact same idea they would have proposed, a year ago when there was no virus or economic crisis. They say, hey, payroll tax cut,
yes,
right?
Yeah, right.
And
it's like an ever-present idea.
Right. Yeah, when circumstances change, your ideas need to change as well, right? And when you keep proposing the same ideas, no matter what the circumstances is, you're obviously in an ideological rut.
Yeah, so true. Zaid, great to have your analysis as always. Great to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.